So Tobias, what is brand identity from a marketing versus a technical perspective?
I think the biggest difference is that brand identity from a marketing perspective, it's like an overall view about how a brand is perceived by end users and other entities on the market. And from a technical perspective, it's a very limited view to it's a limited view to a point where you want to have anchors you can use to pinpoint reputation, trust, whatever you want to call it in the end, because there are multiple dimensions into that, but it's a single point you normally use to pinpoint all this relationship data into it. And most likely it's a domain.
I like the way you previously defined reputation. It was computational trust, or
something? Computational trust. It's a much better way to describe the concept behind this artificial description or this singular word of reputation that is constantly in use, at least for the last decade in handling email traffic, because computational trust is much more precise in describing what we really do as a vendor or on the receiver side of emails, because we don't have an artificial scale where we simply pinpoint you like, you're this or you're this. No, you're perhaps more greenish or more reddish. It's more like we have a multitude of factors that are computed in a way that in the end more or less describe a relationship factor or a relationship vector to describe how much we trust you. So computational trust is a much more interesting form to describe what we are after as a anti-spam provider, but also in the mailbox provider community in a whole.
Oh, okay. And how do you nurture and protect brand identity from a technical side?
Nurturing brand identity from a technical perspective is making sure that you only use stuff you have control over, and that's the most important factor. It doesn't mean that specific thing you need to control over, but only using stuff you can control. Like you have control over your own domain, because you buy your domain, you choose the name you're using, and you should stick to that. Don't try to use external services that do not provide the amount of control you need to nurture your brand. In my presentation, I used the example with a CDN. It's from a technical perspective totally legit to put all your static resources on a CDN, because you want to have fast loading times and all the stuff associated with your website, with your email campaign, perhaps even with your messaging stuff like WhatsApp, Telegram, whatever. But if you do that, then make sure you're going this extra mile and personalize it so that even the CDN networks using your domain, your trust anchor, to provide these additional features. So that's a way to nurture that, and also a way to grow that, because if you centralize it to a single point of control, it's much easier to protect that for the future, because then suddenly you only need to make sure that there are dedicated processes that describe how you change stuff in that specific domain. Not domain as a technical term for a website, but domain even for the classical description of that's the sphere you have control over, and that's the sphere you want to protect. And you don't want to pinpoint holes into that from all the sides simply because one of your employees is too lazy to set it up in the right way.
Why do you think brands still have a low incentive to secure their communications channels?
In most cases, I think the easiest answer there is budget. Even if you normally think of marketing budgets are most likely very broad, or that at least they try to be broad. At least that's one of the things that an MBA would move money into a budget bucket if it's for marketing, because marketing is a very efficient way to grow your user base, and if you grow your user base, you normally make more money. So it's a natural thing to do that. But they are mainly focusing on achieving specific goals, but not how they achieve that. So there's currently not that much as an incentive to secure all these things you want to do in marketing, because most people still think that, oh, it would not happen to me.
Yeah.
Like we have these big numbers of breaches in the last couple of years. Like I will not bring up brand names now because
we knew sure.
Yeah. Most people knew the brand names that are affected by the last big breaches, and perhaps if you're looking into that format again in a half a year, there will be other brands affected by big breaches, because I'm pretty sure it will continue for the next 3 to 5 years. We will see much bigger breaches again, because it's still not in the focus. There's only nowadays a trend to bring up a C-level executive who are responsible for the security of a company. Like it's the term CISO. It's nothing that showed up 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's something that shows up last year or this year. That bigger companies are trying to push people who are responsible for the overall security, information security for a company. That's pretty new, because it's still not yet recognized as a big risk factor. But GDPR changed a lot for that. GDPR with all these fines associated with the scaremongering about the fines, that helped a lot to bring this into the focus of investors and people who are responsible for whole companies, or even for whole complex relationships between multiple global entities.
Yeah. So if I got it right, it's more an organizational problem. So
Most likely.
actually, you should, rather than calculating an ROI behind an implementation for, let's say, DMARC, for example, you should probably also calculate a risk behind that, and so you can compare the investment you have to take to secure the communication channels. That's still missing, probably, right? The awareness.
It's an awareness problem. I think from a processing or from an organizational perspective, it's already there. If you're a company that is interested in ISO 27001, then you already do that, and you're now forced to do that as well for GDPR, and that helps a lot, because GDPR is a much more topics than an ISO certification. ISO 27001 is expensive, and you have to invest a lot of time and a lot of effort to get that right, especially if you want your whole company be certified by that one. And with that comes the risk assessment. You have to describe every risk you have for every channel you use. And one of the things you can optimize with your brand protection strategy and your brand nurture strategy is you reduce the vectors that could be at risk. Because if you have only one or a very defined set of sources or a defined set of spheres where you have to have security, then it's also only a very limited set of things you have to do risk assessment, and that makes it much easier to get the certification in this way.
Okay. So for the future, what is your vision about improving consumer trust in email?
There are multiple things. So we are on the right way with BIMI nowadays. We have this interactivity thing with AMP and schema.org in data, like machine readable data in email. And I think that's a good way to get the consumer base or the end user base into a situation where they can use email again in a way to optimize how they interact with information and data as a whole. Because it's much easier if I can simply press a button and get my airplane ticket directly added into my mobile phone wallet, and that's automatically more or less working. And that's very nice. We are not there yet. There are a lot of hurdles there that still need to be solved. There are a lot of problems in there, in interop problems. Like, schema.org is nice, but I'm pretty sure it will be replaced by something better that is much more precise on what kind of data I have and how it should be displayed. And there's one missing thing currently, is like the back channel. Like, how do I get, if it's everything is automated, extracted automatically out of my email, so I don't have the email in its own anymore in my mailbox, then how do the sender of that email knows that I interacted with it? If that feedback loop is not there, I'm pretty sure that there will be a collision between the old way of doing things in email and the new way of doing things in email, because suddenly you have much less control about how
KPIs,
an end user.
right?
Yeah, it's about redefining the KPIs that are currently used to argue for return on investment in technology for email.
Yeah.
In the past, it was like you have to use engagement and you have to do this and that and that. And now, if you don't get this engagement data anymore, because there is no active openly or click in an email anymore, then suddenly you perhaps should reconsider how you measure your return on these kind of campaigns.
Yeah.
And that's one thing is missing. We heard it today that there are plans from bigger corporations to provide these kind of data in the future. There are already some brands out there that are already doing it, and I'm pretty sure we will see much more data-driven email handling in the future, because that's the thing it should be. It should be automated. It shouldn't matter if I'm watching an email on a desktop PC, on a mobile phone, or perhaps on my smartwatch or in my car. Perhaps Alexa, Siri, whoever you call it, Cortana, there are so many on them nowadays, who's reading that data for me. And I don't care if there's a lot of information in that email. I only care about, oh yeah, that's the next concert I want to go and my tickets arrived. And that's all the information that is necessary for me. I don't need the pictures loaded or click on a link. I got the tickets, it's automatically added into my wallet, and that's how it should be.
Right, and then the only thing you probably choose is the voice for reading your emails.
Yeah, in the end, yes. I have to decide to which corporation I sell my soul.
Okay, that sounds very promising. Thank you very much, Tobias Herkula.
Yeah, thanks for being here.